Hey, the next item on the agenda is item 6, mid-year budget adjustments. Deputy Superintendent Jones.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks, Chair. Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones. If we could go to the backups, and Chair, if you'll recognize Aaron Bruff, our Data and Statistics Coordinator. He's going to assist me in the presentation of these results.
Thank you, Aaron.
So let's see. We should be seeing a presentation pop up. I'm not sure who's driving at this point. Is there someone that, I thought it might be Jeff or Angie? Oh. No, Jeff, it's going to be in, you got to go to Civ Clerk. Angie said she'd be in Civ Clerk real time. Yeah, 6.1. Results of the record October 1 enrollment counts. Agenda item 6.1. Aaron, are you on?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Which attachment is it? Is it the first one?
Yeah, it's the October 1 enrollment counts for SY 2021. The top one.
Click on it. Yeah. Perfect. Yep. That's presentation. So, Chair Cummins, I'll turn it over to Aaron to make the presentation. Again, these are the official October 1 enrollment counts and the analysis behind those counts. And this is, very important as far as the flow goes for the for subsequent agenda items. So, if it's okay with you, I'll just turn it over to Aaron.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Aaron Bruff, over Data and Statistics. Thank you for your time. This report will be similar to the one that we shared with you last month for the September poll, and the information that we received again off the October 1. So if you can advance to the next slide, we appreciate that. Again, this is just to review the time frame that we've talked about and the information that we're processing, and it's important for you to understand. So again, we have the September 9th count, which is the unofficial poll, to find out information where our students were landing because of the COVID pandemic, and the information that we received from there. The October 1 then is the official counts, and we've published those numbers and are making them available. And as we go through these, and I'm sure Scott will talk about this a little bit more, but as we look at these numbers, these then become the official numbers for you to use, both with the common data education process and considering the funding amounts. And then as we move forward, we'll have both the December submission that the LEAs will give to us, and then we have the option of doing a January 15th count, again, see if there are changes in the enrollment numbers. So if we can advance to the next slide. Again, this is just to review these. We're looking at determining the gaps between the actual growth and the projected growth of the numbers, determine the reasons for the reduction of growth, less moving into the state and more going to homeschools, et cetera. Determine where students came from into the online programs and enrollments in the charter schools and such, and also monitor conditions related to the COVID-19 numbers surge. So if we can advance to the next slide. So here are the October 1 numbers. And what we're looking at is a comparison between October 1, 2020, the official state count, and the October 1, 2019 count. So as you can see, the charter schools had 79,255, where the prior year they had 77,630. So it's an increase of 1,625. It's a 2.1% increase that we've seen this year. The districts, then, you see that there is a slight decrease, again, talking about those numbers, where this year we have 587,354 for October 1 counts. That's a decrease that we see from the prior year of 2,419. We've included Utah School of Deaf and Blind inside of here. So statewide, overall, 606,609 was our official count for the October 1 for this year, compared to last year on the exact same date. Doing these date-to-date comparisons, we see a decrease of 794 students, or 1% decrease. If we move to the next slide, this gives some additional information that we shared last month with the official numbers. This is the difference between what the CDC estimate of October 1 would be. Again, these are estimated numbers. As we looked at it, you can see the decreases that we see based upon last year when the CDC met and said this is the projected amount that we would have expected happen without the COVID pandemic hitting Utah. If we can move to the next slide. So a couple of these things, again, this is just repeating what we saw from the September trend lines. There was no unexpected changes. These are showing the actual or the official numbers. We see that our kindergarten enrollment is down from the prior year of 49,489 to this year of 47,941. Again, we're seeing this decrease of about 9.7% decrease from the prior year. We do know that this is an ongoing slight decrease or trend line in here, but we have not been this low in enrollment counts since 2010. I don't have that information either, but we had that question come up as when was the last time we saw our kindergarten enrollment at this rate. Go ahead and advance to the next slide. So as we looked at our estimated new enrollments due to the in-migration and other factors, again, what we saw is an increase. So these numbers that we're looking at here are looking at the students who we think not entering in the first grade, but those who would have moved in, being from first grade all the way up through 12th grade. Typically we see that higher number. Again, of last year of 2020, we saw 14,988 come into the state. And this year it was down to that 13,521. Again, a decrease of influx of students moving into the system. Go ahead and move to the next slide. So again, here are the official numbers that we looked at. Again, this is very similar to what we shared with you last month. As we looked at those who transferred out in the prior year into private school or into the home school setting. Again, we saw this huge increase when we went from 914 students who said that they would be going to the homeschool. This year jumped to that 3,375. And then we saw also that slight increase, numbers not as large, but students moving into the private school setting from the prior year of 411 to 521. If you want to advance to the next slide. And this next one is going to talk about our trend into the online and virtual school increase. Again, we can see this huge increase or this huge movement looking at the indicator of the schools that are offering the virtual and online setting where in the prior year, 14,755 up to this year of 26,605. Basically, that's an 80% increase from the prior year as we have moved into this new setting. If we can move to the next slide on the status. And Scott, do you want to talk about this component right here?
Actually, if it's okay, we'll reserve this for when Patrick and Jake present in the next agenda item. So that's where we really get into, the mid-year update and then setting conditions for next year's budgets in, close collaboration and partnership with the legislature. So
okay.
I'll just reserve this one for their time.
If it's whoever's driving, we have the other document inside of 6.1, which would be the October 1 enrollment 2021. This is going to show the official numbers for the LEAs and the difference from prior year to this year. And hopefully you've had a chance to review this. Go ahead.
Yeah, and Chair, if I may, this is Scott, if I may. What I'd like to do is just kind of scroll through this a little bit and orient board members to it, because it has obviously funding effects on, both our mid-year and this year, and then going into next year, which, again, Patrick and Jake are going to follow on. But I just like to point out, like in the gains that you see, or, the increases in student enrollment that you see with Tooele and Wasatch. Tooele and Wasatch are heavily online program centric. I mean, they're, obviously districts. And as we proceed together through this, you can see also the trend, so the top ones are the districts that saw the increases, the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you see charter schools that are also online programs. Utah Virtual, they were one of the ones that that the cap was raised for them to bring in more students. Mountain Heights Academy and Utah Connections Academy, again, another one where we raised their enrollment caps. You saw increases in student counts, obviously, in those, with the centric online programs. And then we start to go down. Now, it's not necessarily in rank order of, the percentage change. The percentage changes differ because of the difference or a percentage change for a LEA that, was at 100 students and gained 50 students would be obviously a high percentage change, as opposed to one that had 1,000 students and gained 50 students. So these are more along the lines of, where we're showing, if you'll go scroll back up towards the top so I can show them the border or the headers, whoever's driving, go back to the top, see where the differences are. And you see the October 1 counts 2021 and the October 1 counts 2020. So that right-hand column is the difference, by way of comparison from October 1 of, and those are by school year. The October 1 count that occurred in 19 was for school year 20, and the October 1 counts that occurred on October 1 of 2020 are for this school year 21. So then you see the differences. So if you could just kind of scroll down a little bit more. So see, we start with those that had increases. You can see it starts to cascade down to where we reach the point of where we are identifying LEAs that saw decreases in enrollment, starting with right about Spectrum Academy and Beaver School District. Right, and if you could go down to the bottom, just kind of slowly. It's at the bottom of it. I can't see the screen.
It's on the next page.
Yeah, on the next page, if you go down all the way. Yeah. And then so you can see that cascading effect, if you will, or how we show the ones that, there was significant significant decreases in enrollment. So we start with the significant increases in enrollment and those differences, and then the significant decreases in enrollment and significance of those. At the bottom of it are 4 charter schools, Advantage, Bridge, and 2 others, Mountain Sunrise. Those are all open this year, so we don't have prior year data. And then this is where their enrollment counts are for their first year of operations as an LEA. So with that, ma'am, that concludes this agenda item. Subject to any questions from board members on the slides itself or what we see in the trends before we segue into the presentation by our school finance director and MSP coordinator, so we can get into the funding impacts.
I have a question from board member Belknap.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question about the online and virtual in the first slide deck there, Erin. Does that include virtual education that's provided at a district, or are those students incorporated in the district count?
Great question. The online screen that we see inside of here are based upon the Cactus designation of the school if it's offering, if it's an online or a virtual program. So a district school that says they are an online program is inside of this count. Again, for charter school, it says this is online, that's what's incorporated in here. If it's an online course or a virtual course within a brick and mortar, or let's say it's a hybrid model that the schools are currently in, it is not included in this count. This is purely, they've entered in a school designated as a virtual school or an online school.
Okay, follow up, Chair. Thank you. So, Erin, I'm just trying to get clarity. So, for example, Davis School District has Davis Connects, and students go there full time. Is that considered an online school, or is that considered part of Davis School District?
That's considered an online school and would be reflective in these numbers.
Is it also reflected in their negative numbers at the bottom on the next slide deck, or are they translated into Davis School District as part of their count?
So it is reflected as part of their count. So even though there's an increase of movement into the online school there, overall the district did have a decrease.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Chair.
Board member Cannon.
Thank you, Brittany. I would like to go back to slide 10. And I know Scott said you would be discussing this coming up, but I read this and it says the state board may allow a percentage increase in units, otherwise allowable. What are units and what are they referring to? This just didn't make any sense to me. I need help to understand what this is saying.
Chair, can I answer that? So what this has to do with is 4% of decrease. It's not 4% of a decrease. It's 4% of decrease in enrollment. So when we get into the next presentation, we'll be able to more clearly define what we mean by units. It's basically the enrollment counts, the number of students is my understanding. So
a unit is a student?
No, let us, if we can defer and just get into the next presentation, we'll be able to answer that. So Chair, if board member Cannon will let us get into the next presentation, we'll be more clear on what all this means.
Thank you. I was hoping to be clear as I listen to the next presentation, but I will listen and seek clarity as you go.
Yeah. We have other items that'll help make it clearer.
Board member Earl has a question.
I'm trying to decide whether to wait to, and maybe I will. It's just the phrase due to, my thing's in the way. Beyond its control, just having to do with, I know that there's some parents that move to other districts or other entities because the way a school structured their opening this fall was not the way that they wanted to. In other words, they chose something because of the structure of the school. How does that, maybe you're going to address that, how will that idea of beyond its control play out? Anyways, that's just my question.
So Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, if you just want to go into that next item 6.2 presentation, and then I believe we'll get to, you want to have those two questions in the back of your mind as you go through that presentation and address
Yeah, we
those.
will.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. So if we could, Chair, if you'll recognize School Finance Director Patrick Lee and MSP Coordinator Jake Houtrow. They're going to assist me in presenting or, moving through this next agenda item.
Okay, thank you. You may all proceed in this presentation.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Cummins. So if we could bring up the presentation it should be in the backup for that item as well. Funding school year 2020, 2021.
And Chair Cummins, may I make a clarification?
Yes.
Okay, so when we use the term CDC, it's in relation to Common Data Committee, not the other CDC, the COVID-19 related CDC.
Centers for Disease Control.
Center for Disease Control.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, when we say CDC, it's Common Data Committee. And the Common Data Committee consists of representation from the USBE, myself, Director Lee, MSP Coordinator Houtrow, the GOMB, the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, and the Legislative Fiscal Analyst. So we'll move. So then with that clarification, I'll turn it over to Director Lee.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So once we have that backup up there, I think we have the one that we need. So let's see, it should be the very bottom one, the ADM and mid-year update. I believe that's it. Yeah, that's the right one. So that'll be our slide presentation. We will refer to those backups as we go through the presentation. So we may need to navigate over to those, or I imagine board members can refer to those on your computer at the time. I'll give this presentation together with MSP Administrator Jake Houtrow. So starting on the first slide, the board members might recall that we had presented a methodology and some information related to ADM at the last board meeting on October 1st. So I just kind of want to recap that a bit and get us back to where we were then and kind of some of the things that have happened since then. But just remembering back in March, earlier in the year with the soft closures of schools, some concern right at that time came up about issues related to ADM, tracking students, and how that might potentially affect funding as it relates to the current fiscal year, which we're focused on right now. And so, of course, the board waived the 99180 rule at the time for that last part of the school year. And at that time, we began as a USB staff to work together with business administrators, getting input from the Legislative Fiscal Analyst Office, the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, to determine what would be the best route for ADM calculation if any changes needed to occur to account for anomalies in the situation with COVID. So at the meeting for the board on October 1st, when we presented this, you may recall that the board took action simply to allow us to work together with the Common Data Committee members, which includes the LFA and GOMB, to come to an agreement on what would be the best route forward for calculating this ADM. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, so this is just a reminder on the waiver of the board rule for the 99180. This was in relation to the soft closures, of course, and any potential effects that there might have been on ADM in that last part of the year. So it's just a reminder on that, those dates inclusive of March 16th through June 30th. So next slide. So some of the potential issues that that we had in discussion, or that we saw in discussions with the LFA, with GOMB, and with business administrators. Would the soft closure have effects on membership? Will the current fiscal year funding be affected if membership dipped or dropped in any way, especially a very significant drop? What will happen to funding, in fiscal year 22, next fiscal year? And then what happens if membership declines dramatically in the current year, but bounces back the next year? Or does that within the same school year? And how do we stabilize that funding with any of those potential anomalies in fiscal year 20 and possibly fiscal year 21 as it relates to ADM? So next slide.
Chair, this is Scott. Can we go back to or stay on this slide for a second? Because I do want to, this is where I want to pause and address Board Member Cannon's question. The word unit refers to a weighted pupil unit. So basically what we're looking at here is in situations, and we'll get to the code again here, but in situations where, that 4% threshold is reached, the board has the discretion to provide additional weighted pupil units if necessary. So that's why I want to pause here and say, with ADM, with the FY20 ADM calculation, we're asking ourselves these questions. But as we proceed further in this, that term unit is equated to a weighted pupil unit, okay? And that's going to become important as you start to, well, all of it's important, but, as you start to look and see our analysis on the impacts of the counts and the COVID situation overall, not only on current year funding, but future year funding as well. So, Chair, I'll turn it back to Director Lee. Thank you, Director Lee, for letting me press pause there. Subject, though, to just my checking with Board Member Cannon. Does that help, ma'am, clarify it, or did I even confuse it more?
Yes, I perfectly understand weighted pupil units. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yeah, the code doesn't put the WP on, the W and the P on there. So I just thought maybe we should wait until we came to this point. So thank you. Okay, sorry. As the chair directs, go ahead, Director Lee.
Okay, if I
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Cummins. So just a note as well that earlier in that code section, it does refer to weighted pupil units just as units, and so later in in the code section, that's where it connects. So looking at the next slide, if we can go to that. So after considering a lot of these concerns, in the next slide should be the ADM calculation plan on the title.
Jeff, if you're driving, you go to the next slide. Who's driving?
There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes, FY20 ADM calculation plan. So after presenting to the board last month, we decided to work more closely with the fiscal analyst's office. Sorry about that. My little puppy's making some noise. Hold on just a quick sec. Apologize for that. Sorry for that interruption. My little niece was coming in to get the puppy. Apologize for that. So back to the ADM calculation plan. So the ADM, of course, translates into WPU amounts, which are distributed and allocated across all of the LEAs. And so that's the actual final step in the Common Data Committee process. So we did discuss closely with the Fiscal Analyst's Office and the Governor's Office of Management and Budget per the October 1 board approval. And so in discussing with the LFA and GOMB to, the ways to account for the COVID situation and stabilize funding in the current fiscal year, as well as fiscal year 22. And so we did come to agreement with the Governor's Office and with the Fiscal Analyst's Office on how to calculate that FY20 ADM. And so we'd like to review that with you and the agreement or consensus that we came to with with those offices and how to move forward with that. And so at this point, Vice Chair Cummins, if it's okay, I'd like to just turn the time to MSP Administrator Jake Houtrow.
Is it an okay time to take a question really quick?
Sure, absolutely, no problem.
Okay, Board Member Lear.
Sorry, I couldn't get I'm sorry, my mute button was bouncing back and forth. I had a question about this exact last final bullet. I've been wondering, as I've been reading this information, who is the final decider on this sort of flexibility, or you've mentioned the Common Data Committee a bunch of times, but I've felt like our office, the USBE office, maybe even we would agree with the governor's office, and then the legislature would maybe cut us off at the knees, or saying, you're for flexibility, we're not going to do that. This dramatically affects one of the school districts I live in and represent, Salt Lake, and I'm interested in knowing who will, again, be the final decider in terms of how much flexibility, as Jenny referenced that language earlier, through no fault of its own. Who's going to be the final interpreter of that? Maybe that's too big of a question for you, Jake, but I'd love somebody to give me their opinion.
Sure.
Patrick, you can go ahead if you would have an answer on that.
What I would say is it would likely be all parties together, but it's based in code, and Jake will actually review that code reference on how the ADM is calculated, and we will note that there's actually been no change to that code, and thus no change to the calculation itself. And that's essentially the bottom line. If there was to be, I do think that would potentially take legislative action. Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones may want to speak to that a little more, but that's my understanding of it.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Go ahead.
I mean, ultimately, it's, at the decision-making point, and we're all in this together. We'll all move together through this, and we'll move together into the legislative session. And ultimately, it's going to boil down to, first and foremost, we always have to ensure that, we have adequate funding for whatever decision, for whatever decision-making purpose or process. And as we all know, appropriations come from the legislature. It is a partnership type action or process that we take with ourselves, the LFA and GOMB, so that ultimately we can put in front of all of you, all of our elected officials, for decision-making purposes, the facts of where we're at with an enrollment and what those impacts and what the enrollment numbers and the data that we're providing you, how they impact funding for decision-making purposes on, what to do or not to do, and always within the law. So I hope that helps, ma'am.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, there are no other questions if you want to proceed.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Cummins. So I believe if we go to the next slide, we'll begin to just give an overview of how we reached this agreement with the LFA and with GOMB, and so I'll turn that over to Jake Houtrow.
Yes, thank you, Director Lee. This is Jake Houtrow, MSP Administrator speaking. This was some interesting analysis that was put together prior to the October 1 counts being finalized. So it does utilize the September 9th poll data, just as an aside. However, the September 9th poll data is very close to what the actuals came in to be on the October 1 count. So it's still useful analysis. What this data set does, and I apologize that it's kind of a lot to take in, is it looks at the ratio of average daily membership to the October head count from 2014 through 2019 and 2020, again, based on the September 9th poll data. It then predicts the average daily membership for 2020 in those orange highlighted cells, the total being 646,863. That prediction is based on that 5-year average of that ratio, which would be that 0.9798 and 0.9692 for both kindergarten and grades 1 through 12. Interestingly, the yellow highlighted cells are the average daily membership totals based on the prorated average daily membership method that was discussed in the last board meeting. That totaled up to 651,937 average daily membership units, which is a significant jump, both from the average and from prior year, as you can see. And it's what 6,000 above what would be predicted using the method that I've described. The blue highlighted cell, 646,803, that's another average daily membership units. That's the reported, or what we call the raw membership data from the prior school year. And that means the membership for the entire school year, as well as the membership reported after the soft closure. And that is right on target for what we would predict in a given fiscal year, or in fiscal year 2020, I should say, for the average daily membership total. So this is kind of the driving factor as to why we are going with this quote unquote raw ADM rather than the prorated average daily membership. And that covers what I wanted to say on this slide, but if there are any questions on any of these figures, we can take those.
Yeah, and Chair, can I pause here, just add some additional information along Board Member Lear's question?
Yes.
So in statute, it's the board that defines ADM, right? That's, and that's why, so if any board members or the public discretionary is going, so why are we taking the time to present this? Well, it's just that. It's the board, you determine the ADM piece to it all. And that's why, though, we feel it's important to move forward together. What I mean by that is with UMB and the LFA, so that we all are in, part of the same decision-making process that ultimately results in what the funding levels will be for next year's budget. And so that's why we go through this iterative process of defining ADM with you as board members, because it's required by the statute. So hopefully that helps as well on why we're doing this.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions if you want to proceed.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cummins. Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Jones. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. The determination of weighted pupil units, code 53F-2-302. ADM, of course, is a big driver of funding in the current year, and the model is prior year plus growth, and that determines the WPUs in the kindergarten and grades 1 through 12 program. This kind of outlines that. One important note to make is that when growth is negative, then we disregard that negative growth and simply hold the LEA harmless to prior year ADM. So prior year ADM would be used to determine WPUs 1-to-1 without factoring in growth. However, if growth is positive, growth is then factored in. Other than that, not much more to say on this slide. This is just, like I said, the primary funding model for kindergarten and grades 1 through 12. Now, if we can go to the board backup titled, let me check, total basic school cost comparison, or if you would like to go, we don't necessarily need to go on our presentation, but you can refer to the total basic school cost comparison files in the board backup, both for charters as well as just the one that does not have the charters referenced in the title. And that will give you the districts and an aggregate charter figure. And so this backup essentially shows us what the current funding level is for the fiscal year 2020-21, and that would be the left part of the slide, or of the board backup titled Legislative Estimates June Budget. Those are the current funding levels. Again, those are based on projected enrollments as determined during the prior year's Common Data Committee process, as well as school year 2018-2019 ADM. The funding on figures on the right titled Mid-Year Update. That is the projected funding increase or decrease compared to the current funding levels once we true up the budgets using the actual October 1 headcounts that just came in the last month, as well as the average daily membership from the prior year. So there's quite a bit of variance there, as you can see. For the districts, the range is from 21.9% increase to a negative 4.1 decrease in funding if we change the budgets at mid-year update, which we intend to do, of course. 14 districts, 0 to negative 1% change. It's all on the slide. I won't go too far into the LEA by LEA comparison, but take a moment to glance over this and let us know if you have any questions or if any of the big variances cause concern or anything like that.
Yeah, and Chair, if I may, this is Scott. So this is the charter school breakdown, as Jake has pointed out. So we're just going to pause here a second, let individuals review this, board members, the public, what have you. Then we'll switch over to the backup, which shows the district breakdown for mid-year update purposes. So. Jeff, if you could kind of scroll down a little bit, if that's you that's driving. Okay, now, Chair, if we may, can we switch over to the district data or breakdown, please? And, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 line down, that's we put the charters, that's the overall charter increase is 2.2%, but we just showed you the actual charter by charter individual breakdown. That was the previous backup. Now, we're on the districts right now, but we have this line for charters in this one. So I just want to make sure that we started with the breakout of the charters first, and here are the districts for the mid-year update. So, Chair Cummins, at this time, we'll just pause, and if there's any questions to this point, as far along as we are right now.
Are there any questions from board members? I don't see any.
Yes, I'm trying to raise my hand. Here we go. Raise hand. There. Yes. Thank you. I'm just looking, and I looked at these numbers earlier and was interested in some of the more dramatic changes. The charters had the more dramatic increases, not so much decreases. But is there any? And this may be a really dumb question, demonstrates what I don't know about these systems, but is there a verification on these numbers? Is this just the number that the school enrolls? Is there a verification between now and, whenever you do the next formal update? So the student could enroll, decide he doesn't like it after 2 days, leave. Our numbers are skewed if there are enough of those students. Is there any sort of adjustment for that, or does that happen? Do you hear what Chair Cummins?
I think I do, ma'am. Chair Cummins.
Go ahead.
But yes, ma'am. I mean, so when we get the initial enrollment counts, of course, we do a great job. And this is my opportunity to express my gratitude and just how awesome our LEAs did tracking students all the way from when we first went into soft closure at the end of the year, all the way up to the October 1 head count. So it's just phenomenal, the job and the work they did. So with that, once all that information comes in, Aaron's team. That's why we started with Aaron and his briefing to you, regarding the accounts. They QC it. They work really closely with all of the data miners in, the LEAs. So to your main question, or to your question about, student, is enrolled. So it's October 1, it's a snapshot in time. That's why we're recommending that we do another January count, because, there is just so much, potential movement related to COVID right now. So, we QC very well, but, there's not a current process where we go in every day and look and, just see the changes. We need to give a little bit more time and then see if we can do it again in January, especially under the circumstances we are right now. Does that help answer the question? Or if you like, I can have Aaron on
let
this too.
Let me just try a simpler yes/no version of the question, and that is: Do you trust these data? Do you think they are not 100% accurate, but do you think they're solid and a solid reflection of where students are?
Yes, ma'am, I do. I do trust it. I mean, we're always going to have some anomalies, but my answer is yes. And it's because of the close collaboration that we have with the LEAs and our data and statistics team. I trust our data and statistics.
That's good for me.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
There are no other questions if you want to move forward.
So, Jake, I think we need to go back to you.
Yes.
I'll be back on slide presentation, right, Jake?
Yes, please. We can go to the next slide, the historical funding change comparison. It's going to be essentially an aggregate comparison of the data we were just looking at. We'll just be brief here. I didn't necessarily note it, but it is an important distinction. We were looking at the cost of the basic school program only. There were no related to basic program costs factored into that cost comparison that we were just looking at. And the same goes for this slide. The LEA average, let's look at the 5-year average, and this is analysis that I put together from a funding level change from legislative estimates to mid-year update. It's usually a 0.24% increase on average, and the median is 0.11% increase, with the total cost of the basic school program being a 0.35% increase. And in fiscal year 21, we can see across the board, the increases are greater on average than what we have seen in the past 5 years. Again, this is when the change in funding between the legislative estimates and the mid-year update. So we can go on to the next slide, which has already been referenced a little bit. This is code 53F-2-207. Again, it was kind of already touched upon. Important to note, it's that it looks at ADM numbers rather than total funding percent changes. And we did do the analysis to see if this code would apply, or this statute would apply to fiscal year 21 funding. And there were no districts, aside from one district, that met the criteria. And even that district will actually see an increase in funding. But only one district met the 4% drop criteria. And that's a district that has traditionally been losing students over the last several years. Was there anything else that we wanted to discuss, or any questions on the average daily membership as it relates to this statute? Or if not, we can turn the time back over to Director Lee.
I see no questions.
I'm sorry, Chair Cummins, it's Scott.
Yes.
Yeah, if I may. One thing that I do want to pause here on is that, we've asked for a legal opinion from both, legislative attorneys and our own on the wording to avoid penalizing a school district. Would this apply to charter schools? And for now, and our AAGs can jump in on this. The letter of this particular code appears to be that this would only apply to school districts. So for our charter customers or community, just know that we're still working through this with them, because there may have been some charters in the analysis that hit fell below the 4% or 4% below the average. of the highest 2 preceding years. So, we'll need to work on that a little bit more as far as the application of this code to districts and charter schools. I mean, Jake's already covered the districts, but I'm sure board members might have questions about, well, what about charters? Well, we're still working through that, and on that legal interpretation. And Brian has helped me out, by in the chat room with everyone saying that's correct, Scott, applies only to school districts. That's our AAG's interpretation of this particular law or code. So I just wanted to add in that in there as well, Chair Cummins. Thank you. I'll refer back to, through you, back to Jake, who I think is going to turn it back over to Director Lee, subject to your direction, ma'am.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Superintendent Jones. Yeah, we can turn it over to Director Lee now for the remainder of the slides.
Excuse me, Vice Chair.
Yes, Board Member Hanson, do you have a question?
I do. Thanks. I'm sorry. I'm sure you couldn't see my hand.
Sorry.
I just wondered if this was applied to charter schools. Have we done the analysis to see how many schools would find this applicable, or how many schools would be in the 4% situation?
Yes, I believe I did do that analysis. However, since it came to our attention that it only applied to districts, I have not taken a look at that in a few weeks, but we do have that information.
And were there some that would be in the situation?
Again, it's been a little bit too long for me to remember off the top of my head. I believe there were. I can't give you necessarily a concrete figure. There were several, though.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There's no other hands that I can see. Thank you. If you want to keep going.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Cummins. So if we, with this slide is kind of the end of our presentation as it relates to current year funding. So now, we'll be looking forward to fiscal year 22 funding as it relates to revenue, enrollment, and the funding issues itself. So obviously we'll be continuing to look at ADM this year and how that pans out, because that will affect the funding for next year because it's based on prior year ADM. And as the legislative session comes up, we'll need to address some of those future funding issues. We're staying connected with the Fiscal Analyst Office as well as GOMB to continue in discussions about those issues and what they might be. And then, of course, we'll report that to the board. We have been engaged in the Common Data Committee process to address revenue, enrollment, and funding projections for fiscal year 22. And so if we can go to the next slide, I'll just give an overview of that process and where we've been so far. So the first meeting that we had was the property valuations meeting. And that is where we were able to gather consensus revenue estimates, which were reached on October 14th. And I'll give a brief overview of those estimates in the next slide. On our November 2nd meeting, actually, let's stay on that slide. Sorry about that. Go back to that one. Our student enrollment projections meeting was held on November 2nd. We also were able to reach consensus enrollment numbers with the LFA and GOMB. And then our final meeting will be related to the WPU estimates, which we'll have, I believe, on next week, November 9th. And so that'll be the final part of that process. But the members of that group, I think were already mentioned, that are in the CDC process, includes Governor's Office of Management and Budget, Office of the Legislative Fiscal Analyst, the Utah State Tax Commission, particularly on the property valuations meeting, and then, of course, USBE. So yeah, if we can go to that next slide. And that just gives an overview of the basic levy and where that's at for tax year 2021. You can see the projected revenue of $359,650 million in assessed property valuations. The basic levy revenue target for tax year 2021 of approximately $545 million. Last year, or 2020 tax year, was $526 million, so we'll be up somewhat from that. So $30 million in additional revenue set aside for local levy growth, which includes $21 million in tax year, or it was $21 million in tax year 2020, And the tax commission will, of course, work to set the basic rate in spring 2021. Going to the next slide. The CDC FY22 enrollment consensus projections. We do have in your backups what those projections are, the consensus numbers, and it actually includes historical as well. So what the enrollments have actually been in prior years, and then what the consensus projections will be for the current year. So we can bring those up, or you can look at those separately. But you can see some of the summary in this slide here, that the projection is there will be 17 districts to be slightly down in enrollment for school year 2021-2022, projecting 25 districts to increase from October 1, 2020 to October 1, 2021. That's a bit of a tongue twister there. And then projecting charter schools to increase overall by almost 2%. In the charter school backup, you can see some of the variations similar to what it was in the funding backup as well. And if there are any questions on that, we can discuss those a little bit more. But this is a bit more what was discussed in the earlier agenda item. But this is part of what is the CDC process, and we've gotten thus far through that part of it with the enrollments. I believe the next slide is the last slide for this presentation.
Chair
Okay,
Patrick, can we go back to the slide, please?
Yes, sir.
Clarify. Yeah, please go back to the previous slide. We have 41 districts, but USDB, so that math with the 42 includes USDB, right, Patrick?
I believe so. It should, yes.
Yeah. That's why, you know, there's 41 school districts, and then there's USDB, which is 42. That's why it totals to 42. But we know that, you know, USDB is not necessarily a district, so that's how that number comes up. Okay.
Thank you for that clarification on that. Yes. So in summary, for fiscal year 21, the ADM calculation is from the raw data that was reported by LEAs. And this is per our agreement and working with LFA and GOMB, as well as with your support as the board. And then the mid-year update will be finalized this month and into December to kind of true up the funding for the LEAs in this current fiscal year, in this current school year. And then, of course, for fiscal year 22, we're in the CDC process, taking the close looks at enrollments with some of the additional polls. And then, of course, with the final ADM at the close of the school year. And then, of course, we'll be continuing the discussions with the LFA and GOMB, preparing for budgets in fiscal year 22. And with that, that concludes a presentation from myself and from Jay Caltrow.
Are there any questions from board members? I don't see any. Deputy Superintendent Jones, is there anything else on this agenda item?
No, Chair, there's not. I just want to reiterate that we've covered a lot here today. We did cover the mid-year update and what, the glide path or line that we're moving along with the mid-year update. I did have a chance to meet with UASBO leadership yesterday. We do have a couple of follow-ups to do with them as well. I just wanted to make sure that they had a read in on this as well. I'm sure now that this is out, and because this is out now, I'd like just the opportunity over the next couple of days and into next week to make sure I circle back to them, get more input from all of our LEAs, including our charter schools. I did meet with some of the charter school representation as well. I didn't go into the details at all. The board members are the first ones to see this down to this level of detail. But I'll be working with all of our, representatives or respective representatives of our LEAs along the lines of the mid-year update. And then, as Patrick articulated, we'll be back on the agenda, subject to your approval, leadership's approval, with the board in December and then January and leading into the legislative session. Well, I anticipate some great things will happen between all of us, between all of the partners in the interest of public education. our educators, and our students. So that does conclude this briefing, ma'am. Subject to any questions or concerns.
I see no questions. So that concludes this agenda item. Thank you for all that information.